Chapter 5, An Odd Sort of Tea Party, page 21. After several years of protest, most of the taxes that were part of the Townshend Act were repealed, except the tax on tea. At that time, tea was a very popular drink in the colonies. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act. Although it did not impose an additional tax, the Tea Act continued the tax on tea that had been created by the Townshend Acts. Organizations such as the Sons of Liberty had meetings throughout the colonies. They came up with a plan to protest the tax on tea. In December of 1773, 7 ships carrying tea were docked in Boston. About 100 protesters dressed up like American Indians as sort of a disguise. They then boarded 3 ships and dumped 342 large boxes of tea into Boston Harbor. This act of protest later became known as the Boston Tea Party. Within a few days, similar tea parties took place in other coastal cities such as New York City and Charleston. In the weeks and months after the Boston Tea Party, the names of the people who took part in the event were kept secret. In fact, only one person was jailed for throwing boxes of tea into the Boston Harbor. However, today we know the names of 116 people who took part in the event. None of these people are known to us now as leaders in the American Revolution. In fact, the only famous person associated with the Boston Tea Party was Samuel Adams, who spoke at a meeting attended by many of the people who actually threw the tea in the harbor. Intolerable acts. The tea parties that took place throughout the colonies angered King George III and the British Parliament. In 1774, Parliament published the colonies, in 1774, Parliament punished the colonies, Boston in particular, by passing a series of laws which the colonists called the Intolerable Acts. One of the Intolerable Acts closed the port of Boston until the colonists had paid for the tea that had been destroyed in the Boston Tea Party. This meant ships were not allowed to come and go from Boston Harbor. Another of the Intolerable Acts, called the Quartering Act, required colonists to provide food and shelter to British soldiers whenever they needed it. King George III thought the Intolerable Acts would lead Americans to turn against groups such as the Sons of Liberty and the people who had destroyed tea in the protest. However, just the opposite happened. In churches, public buildings, and homes all over the colonies, public opinions turned against King George III and the British government. Although not everyone agreed that the Boston Tea Party was a good idea, the British government's decision to punish all the colonies did not go over well. In August 1774, a Virginia planter named Thomas Jefferson wrote and published a pamphlet called A Summary View of the Rights of the British American. It argued that the British Parliament did not have the right to rule the 13 colonies. This document made Jefferson famous. In September 1774, 12 of the 13 colonies sent delegates to a big meeting in Philadelphia to discuss the situation. This meeting later became known as the First Continental Congress. The First Continental Congress did 2 things. First, it called for a boycott of all British goods, which meant that people from all over the colonies were told not to buy or use anything made in Great Britain. The First Continental Congress also sent King George III a petition or request asking him to withdraw the Intolerable Acts. By this time, however, some thought that the time for talking was past. In March 1777, Patrick Henry made a famous speech in Virginia. With people such as Washington and Jefferson in the room, Henry said, "Gentlemen, may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war is actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may have take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death.